One of the wonderful privileges about doing these podcasts and appearing on this screen and having the privilege of your company is that you are able to invite amazing people on to have a conversation. And one of the things about working in media, TV, the creative arts, is that you are blessed with the fact that you actually meet real authors and you are then able to physically hold their work in your hand because you are very, very grateful for the expression that they have spent a lot of time putting in. You are also very grateful that on social media, they absolutely make you laugh with an intellect that I think is razor sharp and second to none. Now, I am not just saying that because I'm bringing Daniel Jupp on, who has written two books that we are going to discuss. And because Daniel's my guest, I genuinely mean that. And I know that other people absolutely appreciate his talents and his razor sharp wit. So I'm going to now sit down with Daniel Jupp. I want to find out who he is, what about him, discover his journey, and for the motivation about behind the books that he has written. Daniel, can I just thank you thank you so much for joining me. It's absolute pleasure to meet you.
That's okay, and what an introduction. Thank you very much. I've got to say, we start out in agreement because I have a very high estimation of my wit and intellect as well. So, we're in perfect agreement already.
Daniel, brilliant. I have to say that I genuinely mean that. There are times I have laughed out loud and rolled about the floor in hysterics, and I won't mention the certain word that you recently joined together and managed to put in a paragraph, but it was absolutely hilarious, and it is the way. It is your intellect and the way that you put things together that I know that people really appreciate. So thank you. Daniel, let's ask the first question, and,
Yeah.
and sometimes I'm asking that myself. Who are you, sir? What is your background, and what has led you to write two books, and one of them I have in my hand. I'm very
And
proud to
doesn't
have
it
that.
look beautiful?
It
Doesn't
does
it
look
look
it
beautiful?
does look beautiful. And one day when we meet, I want you to sign this. So you wrote two books: A Gift for Treason, the cultural
Yeah.
Marxist assault on Western civilization, and then you've written another book, Gates of Hell, and the clue is Gates about Bill Gates. So I want to have those discussions. So Daniel, who are you, sir? Who are you?
Well, I'm an irritating Facebook presence mainly, and a keyboard warrior, and as everyone can instantly tell, a bit of a geek. But I'm 50 years old. I'm from Essex. I'm from a working class background, and I went to university, and I wasn't that politically engaged at the time. So this is quite a while ago, in the 1990s. But I got more and more aware from going to university, and I was the first person in my family to go there, that all of the things that I'd considered fairly normal and average viewpoints were now supposedly bigoted and racist and verboten, and there are things that you're not allowed to say and not allowed to think. And that was already quite bad in the 1990s, and it's got considerably worse since. Nobody was using the phrase woke at that time, but wokeness has just exploded and captured the institutions, and it's a modern form of utterly repressive, sensuous, and to my mind, evil mentality, which takes a lot of the traditional morality that someone like me from a working class background considers normal, and inverts that and tells you that loving your country is something to laugh at, believing in God is something to laugh at, Christianity and nationhood are things to despise. So I kind of first encountered that in my late teens and early 20s, that I'd never experienced it before. In at school, even from my teachers, I hadn't encountered that kind of thing. It got worse and worse, and I started arguing online with people and discovering just how much through social media these attitudes were prevalent. And and we've all seen it. We see it with how popular with certain sections of people Jeremy Corbyn was, or we see it with the Democrats in the US. And for my first book, I decided to try and think, what is it about the West that makes it special? Because I'd always had a loyalty to the Western world and a respect and affection for our history and our culture. And I didn't understand why people didn't have that themselves. And they lived in these very free societies. They weren't being oppressed. Most of the people who were acting as if they were oppressed were richer and more comfortable in their existence than I was. And I didn't understand it. So I kind of started looking into what they were saying, and it really exploded from 2016. So I did my university time, and then I just went out into the working world. But I was worrying about these issues and thinking about them. And then I did kind of fairly normal. I didn't go into the academic world, although I trained for that, because I didn't have the money and connections that you need really to get into an academic career these days. It's not something that you can't do the networking to get into an academic career without having a certain financial background, and you can't accord with the academic viewpoints that you're supposed to accord with politically unless you're on the left. So there was this odd combination of you've got to be left wing and you've got to be wealthy. And the more and more I looked at it, I found that when it came to Brexit and Trump in 2016, I was instinctively on Trump's side because I felt that he was on my side. This was someone who seemed to like the United States and its history, but also seemed to like Britain and its history. And this was someone who had fairly, what I saw as sensible economic ideas, and wanted to improve the lives of working class people. And I couldn't see anything to object with that, with that position. But there was this wave of media-led hatred of Trump almost instantly. And the same thing applied to Brexit. There was this wave of hatred of Brexit. And so in 2019, after a couple of years of experiencing that, I wrote my first book, A Gift for Treason, which was about all of the different forces, all of the different attitudes that were attacking Western civilization. And these were the kind of generally well-off people who had been taught at university to hate their own nations, whether that was Canada or the USA or the UK. And, where did those attitudes come from? Who was responsible for them? And what is it about the West, the traditional West and traditional morality that I had that those people didn't have, or that those people objected to? So my first book was saying, look, we have this incredibly rich cultural heritage as a people. We have grown up in very free societies that are more free than other parts of the world, that have a historical record and a technological record and an economic record to be proud of. Why are there so many people hating these things? And, the deeper you dive into it, the more you find that it's been sustained by communist rhetoric for a long time. And so in that first book, I talked about cultural Marxism. And cultural Marxism is disapproved of by some people. I've heard it said that it is anti-Semitic. I don't think the term cultural Marxism is anti-Semitic at all. And I always oppose anti-Semitism. But what it encapsulates is that Marxism has a very simple ideology at its core. And the simple ideology is that capitalism is evil, Western nations are evil, and it's all based on exploitation, greed, and power. And the Marxist, the traditional economic Marxist, says that there are people who do the work, the workers, and people who exploit the workers, So there's the proletariat, and then there's the exploitative capitalist class that we should overthrow. And we need a radical overthrow of these people, and then we'll institute a fairer, better society based on communist and socialist principles, and that will suddenly improve the world, and there'll be no such thing as human greed. And of course, what communism actually results in is a record of 100 million deaths. 100 million innocent people slaughtered, according to the Black Book of Communism, which is the best scholarly synthesis of the best research on communism globally there's ever been. And I advise anyone to pick up a copy of that book if they don't have it. So there's this utopian promise that Marxism gives, with this very simple division of, you've got the oppressor, you've got the exploiter on one hand, and you've got the exploited and the victim on the other hand. And all you've got to do is flip those things, and then society makes sense and society works better. Cultural Marxism is taking the same narrative, the same idea that there are oppressors and victims, and everyone can be neatly divided up into these two categories, and all you need is a radical revolution flipping the two things round. And it applies it to race and culture. So cultural Marxism is all the people saying, yes, the West is exploitative, but it's exploitative based on racism. It's not exploitative based on economic class. And even economic class is a feature of racism, according to cultural Marxists and critical race theorists, who are a branch of cultural Marxists. And all of that stuff seemed to me to completely ignore just how brutal many non-white societies have been in the past. Some of the cruelest empires in human history have been non-white ones. So the racial argument didn't seem to make any sense to me. Some of the most hierarchical and class-driven societies are in the ancient world, and they're nothing to do with capitalism, essentially, as we understand it today. They are to do with theocracy, or they're to do with, Egyptian societies or ancient Chinese societies. So this reductive idea that Western civilization is particularly bad, Western civilization invented things like slavery, and Western civilization invented capitalism, and that all of those things are guilt that can be applied to Western civilization, seem to me reductively stupid, and something that's easily disputed by common experience, because the common experience is that up until recently we'd had centuries of the average standard of living, the level of enfranchisement and rights that we have as individuals rising in the Western world faster than they rose anywhere else. So the objective historical record and personal experience told me that all this stuff was bullshit. So I set out then, arguing with people and telling people on the line exactly why it was bullshit. And then I put that into as much of that as I could, together with a kind of Herculean task. But I tried to sum up what's effectively 2,700 years of history. That's the Western heritage. It goes right back to the late Bronze Age collapse of civilizations and the Trojan War. We're culturally referencing those things still. And we have that as part of our cultural heritage, along with the Judeo-Christian heritage, which stretches back 2,000 years and more, if you can consider just the Judaic part of it. I tried to summarize what the West is, why it's valuable, and why these people are attacking it. And that's the focus of the first book.
Daniel, what did you study? What did you study at university?
I did. Well, I got involved in American politics and literature quite early, which is why I still talk about the American situation and what's happening in America quite a lot, as well as having some family over there now. But my first degree was English and history. Right. And then I did a BA, which was on American literature. And then I did a PhD, which was focusing on Edgar Allan Poe. So a lot of reading and thinking about 19th century America.
Brilliant. So that has given you a grounding, and of course I know Essex extremely well. American viewers may not, but you have described that brilliantly. And please, come at me in regard to this next statement, because as you've said, and I identified with that, where you're talking about your working class background, we remember, sadly, dreadful Labour MPs like Emma Thornberry, attacking white van man, because white van man has got a load of England flags outside their house proudly. Yeah. And you're then raising this whole thing of the political class, and I'm not just picking on Emma Thornberry for the sake of it, but she is quite a wonderful illustration of this, of Islington, that part of North London, and moving away from roots. So just trying to encapsulate that. From when you left university leading up to, I suppose we're going the whole EU leaving movement, and then eventually UKIP, 2015, 4 million votes, 1 MP, I think Carswell, and then the
our wonderful first past the post system working effectively there.
Go on, your thoughts.
Well, it's about the disenfranchised, the white working class in particular, but also non-white working class people generally are entirely disenfranchised in the system we have at the moment. So, our history, the whole of Western history has been about being unusually good at spreading enfranchisement and doing it earlier than other civilizations did. And being, spreading the rights and the political engagement as far as possible. And we were very good at that. And we had this inheritance of high levels of both freedom and political engagement if we wanted it. We had the free choice to, right, I'm going to get politically engaged and I might have the capacity to have some say. What we saw with Brexit and with Trump in 2016 was the people who had always kind of quietly possessed the majority of the power, suddenly deciding that they were no longer going to accept people like me having a say, and people like the trucker or the plumber who votes for Trump in America having a say. And what they would do is, rather than kind of rig the system through personal connection and through just having certain advantages in life because you're born wealthier, they were going to rig the system through deliberately denying democratic votes. And that's what they did. That's what they did. They did everything they possibly could. The elite, and their kind of organs of power that they had taken over, that are supposed to be serving everybody. But I'm talking about things like, the FBI and the Justice Department in the US, or the media, who are supposed to be objectively holding whoever happens to have power to account, and then became rabid partisans for one side of politics, and only pressing that side of politics because that was the side favoured by the elite. All of the kind of mechanisms that we'd built up to give ordinary people a say and to give them a level of engagement in political decision making, however minute that is. You know, your one little vote amongst millions. At least you had that vote, and you had free and fair elections that I believe weren't being rigged as a commonplace. You know, there were certainly things that went on. You know, the more you look into it, you find out that you know, there are cases where Democrat politicians had the machines in place in cities like Detroit, you know, from the early 20th century. And there's been political corruption for a long time, and there's been very wealthy people managing the system to their benefit, for, of course, through all history. But it got so incredibly blatant in 2016, because in 2016 we saw that the majority of people in Britain wanted to be free of the EU, and that was you know, that wasn't a rigged vote. That was a vote they tried to rig against Brexit. So it wasn't rigged in favour of Brexit in any way. You know, the whole political establishment, effectively, apart from a handful of individuals, came out and said that we'd have economic ruin, we'd have disaster, trade would stop. You know, government resources, state money, was spent by the then Conservative government back in the Remain argument, sending leaflets to every household. And you know, I thought then they've offered us this vote, but they're trying to rig it as it goes along. And then once the vote went through and we won against all expectation, they then said, essentially, well, this is something that poor and powerless and unimportant people want, and we're going to ignore them. You know, you immediately saw people working to get us back in the EU. You saw the House of Commons in chaos, with the Speaker of the Parliament, John Bercow at the time, doing everything he could to rig votes against Brexit. You know, and you saw that the people who are supposed to be enforcing fair rules of fairness and enforcing a democratic accountability to all this were partisan actors who were benefiting from rigging it one way. And that's exactly the same that happened with Trump in 2016. He managed to win despite the game being rigged against him and against the ordinary people who wanted to vote for him. You know, there was electoral fraud against Trump in 2016, but the vote for Trump was so unexpectedly large that they couldn't do enough of it. And then what they did, you know, they did things like they spied on Trump. They had, you know, really dodgy Pfizer warrants to spy on him. And this was, you know, all stuff that Obama signed off on and that was agreed by the Obama administration. You know, they were spying on a candidate for president. And then they carried on spying on him whilst he was president. You know, that's even more astonishing. And, you know, they put in place this massive system of electoral fraud. There's the hilarious, you know, clip where Biden in his senile dementia accidentally says that we've created the massive, the biggest system of fraud you've ever seen. You know, so they were outright saying it. And then there's the Times Magazine article after 2020 that came out and said, well, we manufactured the result and we set up all these organizations that would bolster our vote and reduce Trump's vote, but we were fortifying democracy. You know, that's how they put it in the you know, the famous Time Magazine article. It's fortifying democracy to get all these institutions of power, you know, including the American equivalent of the CBI, and to use all of them against one candidate that's supposedly democratic, you know. And you know, there was the Dominion machines, which, you know, it's been proven in court, by the way, it's been proven in court that those machines could be hacked in minutes. And they don't even need to be hacked, because if you're an operator of that machine, if you're allowed to be an operator of a machine, the technical manuals for it tell you how to weight votes. You know, all of the grounds on which Trump contested 2020 were legitimate. It was a vote that went to Trump in reality, and they just blatantly stole an election. And then all of the supposedly neutral or objective or legal verifiers of an election were already in on the steal, and including Republicans like Bill Barr. Bill Barr refused to do any investigation of electoral fraud and immediately told everyone that he had authority over to stand down and not investigate electoral fraud. The Supreme Court, we know, refused to hear cases on grounds of standing. Well, if a citizen in any particular American state doesn't have a standing when an election is stolen, who does? And it wasn't just individual citizens that tried to bring those cases. It was affected Republican states tried to bring those cases. And we were told that nobody had standing to bring those cases. So the system was obviously rigged from 2016 and obviously even more obviously rigged from 2020. And anyone being objective, anyone being rational could see that.
It's interesting what you're saying about Bill Barr, his history in regard to Ruby Ridge, his relationships, the gentleman that has just gone out of my mind, which is the first big investigation they did against Trump, and the relationship that he had or the wives had, etc. Very, 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 very interesting, because as you're saying, coming against the establishment, and you're quite right. In fact, and I researched this, started writing about this, where even Abraham Lincoln, all those years ago, they were trying to get him off the ballot, and they were stuffing votes, and there was electoral fraud all that far back.
Well, Lincoln is a very interesting one because, I've got Southern US friends, and that gives you a very different perspective on Lincoln. Instead of this kind of hero who saved America from the people who wanted to continue slavery, if you come from a Southern US background, Lincoln is a guy who wasn't really a legitimate presidential pick in the first place. The system had been adapted, let us say, for him to stand. And yes, there were states that objected to him standing altogether and didn't think he had a legal basis to stand as president. I think it was 10 states that, didn't have him on the ballot. He went further than the powers of the presidency really allowed at that stage, because it's rather similar with the EU. If the US was at that stage was a voluntary and benign arrangement where each of the states was in a federal system that they agreed with, then states should have the right to secede. They should have the right to leave. Any system you don't have the right to leave is a form of tyranny. It's not a free system. And if a state can't secede from the United States of America, then the United States of America is not a country with freedom. So really, the Southern US states had the right to secede and should have been allowed it. And they had it by the Constitution. The Constitution would have allowed them to leave without a war. Now, we may say in certain ways it's a good thing that the United States held together, and it's certainly a good thing that, slavery was abolished. But the way Lincoln saved the USA as a united nation was itself quite tyrannical. He used military force and he used blunt power, and he was prepared to go into a war when people had a constitutional right to secede.
And I have dear friends in North Carolina, etc. So and elsewhere along there, but these discussions have come up, and you're quite rightly, you're talking about secession. We're then talking about, cotton being, and you can tell me maybe this is an oversimplification, but cotton being produced, then being transported to the northern states. They're then making money out of that material and then selling, then transporting that back in the lines of clothing and all the rest, and actually selling that to the southern states, while the northern states are benefiting from that. There are, what you're alluding to quite rightly, as in our own case, there are other issues that are going on. There are things that are not so using that phrase black and white as people think, because secession.
Well, if you look at someone like, in terms of the American Civil War, if you look at someone like Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, he was someone who was from a plantation family, but he was actually in favor of the abolition of slavery, and he was the kind of most famous, most renowned Southern Confederate general. And the issue on which he fought the North was not on the issue of slavery. The issue on which he fought the North was on the rights of individual states and them having the right to secede if they wish to do so. And, on the basis of regional loyalty. So he had a regional loyalty to the state he was born in, and he believed that was stronger than his loyalty that was demanded to the federal government. So, any system that says you cannot voluntarily leave this is not a free system. And it's similar with the EU.
Yes.
We're supposed to have joined a voluntary organization of nation states, combining some of their resources and combining some of their efforts and aligning their laws willingly and voluntarily. And yet we saw that when people said, well, actually, this isn't working for us, and in, nearly half a century of membership, generations of people didn't have a say in that. I was born in 1974. I never particularly liked the EU, and I didn't get a say about it until I was already, had voted several times and was in my, 40s. Or so there were generations of people that had no say on being in the EU. And it seemed to me that how can you say that is a democratic system and an accountable system where it's set up so that you have no say on it for generations. When you do have a say on it and you say we want to leave, the entire political establishment unites to try and stop that happening, and to reduce that and ameliorate it, and enter you into a series of negotiations with the EU where you end up leaving them still with us, the British public, paying for our taxes, money that our government then still gives to the EU. We're still giving money to the EU. And what was delivered was not Brexit. It was not a full Brexit. No. We are now, by the treaties that subsequent Conservative leaders agreed to, we are now still paying money to the EU. We are still aligning our laws with the EU. We're still accepting EU interference and EU say on how we treat asylum seekers, how we treat people trying to invade our nation via dinghy. So all of the things that we would be able to deal with effectively if we were genuinely a sovereign nation, we still can't deal with effectively because we're in this kind of half in, half out scenario, which people call Brexit, but isn't a full Brexit.
And 17,410,752 of us, with a majority of over 1 million, voted out.
Yes.
That was our democratic decision, and we were given that referendum vote.
Well, just compare the two things, when we joined and when we left. When we joined, under the 20-year rule and the 30-year rule of the release of secret documents, things have come out since we joined the what was the EEC and then became the EU, which showed that the government then, again a conservative government, the government then lied to people and were going around saying that joining the EEC involved no diminishment of British sovereignty.
Absolutely.
And actually it involved a huge amount of diminishment of British sovereignty, and the government's own legal advisors were telling them that. They concealed that advice they had from their legal advisors. So they went into a campaign to join the EEC, lying to everybody, lying to the ordinary people. And of course, what we saw after joining the EEC was this constant process of, a next stage of negotiation, a next round of treaties, leading to things like Maastricht, where more and more power was taken from our national government and given by that national government to the EU. Well, that's power that our national government only holds in trust. Every power that our national government has over us as individuals is a power they only have because we allow them to have it. And they are supposed to represent us. They didn't have the right to give it away any more than someone that you give the keys to your house has the right to invite squatters in when you're not there. You know, they didn't have the right to transfer power from the UK to the EU, the EEC or the EU, and they were effectively selling the family silver, giving away what was ours, and which they only hold power over in trust for periods where they're elected.
And of course, then Ted Heath taking us in, as far as I'm concerned, he was mentored by Jean Monnet, one of the architects of common market, leading into eventually the EU, as you've said. And then it was sold to us about saying, we're gonna sort out trade barriers so we can trade with these countries. And I remember there's that brilliant book, The Noble Liar, about the BBC, written by Jonathan Aiken. And Jonathan Aiken then refers to the fact that, you had journalists like Jack D'Manio on Radio 4 who were raising this issue of saying, well, I'm not, I love Europe, but I'm not very keen on Europe. Yeah. And this whole illustration of how the propaganda is controlled, and Ted Heath phones up the radio controller, his friend, I've forgotten the name, and then Jack D'Manio finds himself sacked, and
I think the difference, there's been a technological difference that has allowed people to work out what's going on a bit better now, and that is not only did Brexit and Trump force the malign elites who don't really want the people to have a say to be more obvious in the ways they were rigging everything for their advantage. So they had to kind of come out of the woodwork essentially, and we saw them crawl out from their stones and do the things that were deeply anti-democratic to retain the power and influence that they thought was naturally theirs, and and that our democracy should only act as a kind of an illusion. They were happy with votes as long as those votes were between two parties that were essentially the same. They were happy with votes, and as long as those votes could be, by using the powers of the state, rigged in a certain way. As soon as they started losing votes, and the EU has a wonderful record for this. The EU is consistently, when they were trying to force through what became the Maastricht Treaty, it wasn't just people in Britain who were suspicious of this stuff. They had to have a multiple vote in France.
Yes,
they had, and every time that any national group of people said, no, we don't want this, they said, okay, change the label of it, didn't change any of the content or the power that had been changed, and then gave it back to the people and said, vote again. And you kept voting until you gave them the right answer. And, they tried to do that with Brexit, really. People pressed, the Liberal Democrats in particular wanted to have another vote as quickly as possible. But they didn't, the level of public awareness of how things were being rigged is greater. And it's greater now, essentially, because they went so far in their efforts that they actually produced a groundswell of response to that, which has fed alternative media. And, you know, the fact that we can discuss like this here, the fact that, you know, Russell Brand has a channel and can have a channel, or, you know, Steve Bannon in the US, and all the alternative media only exists because the malign elites entirely captured mainstream media. You know, there's 5 or so companies that own virtually 99% of the mainstream media and legacy media world. Every newspaper is linked into a group that is essentially controlled by 5 companies. So their capture of mainstream media, and the fact that there was no voice for people like us, no representation politically for people like us, and no access to an alternative view, actually created the huge fan base that exists for everything that, you know, the stuff that's happening now on Rumble, or you know, the fact that Tucker Carlson can leave Fox and then get even more views and even more following. The fact that people like, you know, Joe Rogan are doing a lot better than MSNBC or you know, CNN. All of that alternative media exists because they'd already made it obvious that that's the only way we would hear what we want to hear and be able to say what we want to say. And their efforts at censorship have actually you know, driven the alternative and increased the popularity of the alternative.
I couldn't agree more, and just, you know, brilliantly said. Daniel, I'm also conscious of time, and I want to do justice to your other book. And the other thing is that, you know, God willing, I'd love you to come on again and us to continue an amazing conversation, because you've just laid that out brilliantly in regard to the southern states. We look at what happened in Europe, and even though there might be, you know, that historical years distance, but that is actually when we voted on the 23rd of June, I think 2016, with all that majority vote, when we saw people so determined to get out of their house and walk to the polling stations to exercise that vote, we know at that time that spurred on Bannon and spurred on the Trump campaign. We know that it's suddenly this populist, and they can't stand that. They can't stand that word, populist.
Isn't it? So doesn't it tell you everything that populist for these people, for the elites, is an insult, and for the mainstream, you know, the legacy media, populist is an insult. What, the fact that you're popular, shouldn't that be your democratic aim? Shouldn't you be trying to be popular? Isn't that supposedly what gathers your votes? But of course, we know now that isn't what gathers their votes. Dominion machines and electoral fraud gathers their votes for them.
And potentially, you know, the fact that we have concerns over postal voting. We also have concerns over electronic machines over here as well, that may be even used in union voting or for council elections, or how you tabulate those votes. I'm not making that up.
Yeah, I believe they're already used for some votes in London, aren't they? Which is not surprising, given, you know, Sadiq Khan's control there.
There are some interesting contracts out there that seem to involve a particular Japanese company, which I won't mention, but there is the clue. But Daniel, well, I sort of last 10 minutes, but you've then written another book, which I sadly don't have, but which I need to get hold of. Which I want you to talk about.
You definitely need to get. That's at least one extra sale for me.
That's at least one extra sale. No, bless you. And I'll tell you what, that's good. How, just to say now, how can people get hold of your work? Could you just do yourself a plug? How can people get hold of your book?
Well, I'm on Facebook if anyone wants to friend request me, and it's as Daniel Jupp. I've got a Substack which I write very regularly, so it's all, I'm kind of averaging an article every 2 days at the moment. And the majority of them, I try to do one that's a paid article each week, and that's on a Substack called Jupplandia, which is jupplandia.substack.com. I do loads and loads of articles there, talking about all sorts of things that are happening in the West at the moment. But yeah, so that's the main way to get hold of me, either on Substack or on Facebook. That's where I'm kind of paying the most attention.
Thank you.
And I hate to be, giving a plug for Facebook because of what Zuckerberg's like. He's one of the maligned billionaires that's causing so many troubles at the moment. And I should probably go back to what we were saying earlier and say that, one of the most significant problems in the West today is that there's been an alignment of the most wealthy and the most radical. So this kind of communist hard left attitudes have aligned fully with big business, big tech, big pharma, and we see the merger of the two, and we see the merger of the state, the big state, and corporations who aren't interested in real free enterprise and real capitalism. They're corporatism. Yep. Which means that they're huge corporations that suppress free trade and kind of squash anybody who tries to innovate and get ahead in a fair system. So yeah, the alignment of the most radical and the most wealthy is where most of our issues stem from, because the very rich, the elite, and the very radical essentially did a deal, and the rich said, you can have your radical social theories and we will back those, we will support those, we'll have diversity, equity and inclusion. Yes. We'll have economic, social and governmental kind of rules that the investment banks force on every company. And every company will have its pride propaganda and its Black Lives Matter propaganda, and all of these kind of breaking of kind of traditional morality actions and ideologies. All of that will be supported by big business, and it will be supported by big business because at the same time the radicals will ignore the way the elites are profiting and benefiting themselves. So it's a wonderful deal for the elite because they fund things like Just Stop Oil, and then they invest in the companies that are going to have this. Oh, it's a new energy source. Yeah, we own all the stock for that. Yeah, we've created the company that's supposedly like, we've persuaded government that this has to be done. Yep. And at the same time, we've got these useful idiots of the radical left protesting to make us more money. So that's what lies behind a lot of it. And my second book, Gates of Hell, is talking about Bill Gates because he is, of all the malign billionaires we face at the moment, he's the most dangerous.
Daniel, in a couple of minutes, I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this. You describe him as the most dangerous. Without putting words in your mouth, could you please describe to us why he is the most dangerous in your opinion?
Yeah, because he's the only one who's active in not just one area of the kind of madness we're facing, but in all of them. So he's involved in net zero. He's involved in genetically modified organisms. He's involved in artificial meat. He's involved in all of the kind of green policies that are going to tell us what you can eat and when you can eat, and you've got to eat insects. And he's also involved in obviously the vaccines and the big pharma. So someone like George Soros may be corrupting the justice system or supporting open borders. Well, Bill Gates does both of that. Someone like Zuckerberg might be helping censorship and being the kind of outsourced censorship wing of the Democratic Party in the US. Well, Bill Gates is funding the legacy media organizations to huge amounts of money. You know, the UN might be doing malign things and is doing malign things. And, you know, Bill Gates is the only person who, as an individual, has effectively taken control of a branch of the UN. The World Health Organization is more controlled by Bill Gates than it is by entire nations. You know, he supplies 13% of its funding. He's effectively taken over global medical research, and, you know, and he's also investing in and taking over agricultural policies. You know, so he's had huge amounts of influence, not just on vaccines, but in lots of other areas. And he's the billionaire, by the way, as well, who organizes other billionaires. You know, the thing that the Giving Pledge years ago was Bill Gates getting together, socially gathering other billionaires to follow his agenda. And people like Warren Buffett invested loads of their money in the Gates Foundation, and, you know, they've helped build Gates's individual power, but they've also gone along with and started funding the same things that he funds.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, putting it in a British context and our own British politicians, because the photographs are out there. So I'm not making this up, that suddenly, you know, people like Andrew Mitchell are photographed with him. Grant Shapps are photographed with him.
Yeah.
Penny Mordaunt is photographed, if not having dinner with him, with a few other.
The entire COVID policy was directed, if you're going to say any one individual, it's not Boris Johnson, it's not Trump, it's not Dr. Fauci, it's Bill Gates. You know, everything that was done was stuff that Bill Gates was feeding through the World Health Organization and the Gates Foundation. The Gates Foundation, as I describe in my book, Gates of Hell, the Gates Foundation was the main advisor for every Western government, along with the WHO. You know, the World Health Organization, controlled by Gates, and the Gates Foundation, obviously controlled by Gates, were the two main advisors to every Western government. And you had to ignore their advice to do anything sensible. You know, they were the ones who wanted masks. You know, Bill Gates was a big supporter of masks. There's ludicrous footage of him later then saying, you know, you can actually go and find the footage still where he's advising masks. And then a little bit later, after that was discredited by, you know, gold standard research methodologies and the Cochrane Library collation of all the evidence on masks, said that masks were worthless. Well, people like me knew they were worthless years ago, you know, and were saying that. But Gates was the one behind that. If you're going to point to any one individual, it's Bill Gates. And obviously there's lots of other malign people that went along with it. And I think even right down to the level of your local GP, they went along with the bullshit and they were paid to go along with it. You know, they were getting extra payments for the number of COVID referrals they made.
Absolutely.
You know, absolutely. And but the kind of the instigation, the plotting, the main, and he boasts about it in his own book. He boasts about, you know, seeing news of COVID break and then immediately gathering some experts and taking control of the situation and saying that he was frustrated with Trump's government not doing anything about it, and then effectively taking over the global response.
I hear. Daniel, I just on a personal level, I just very much thank you for joining me today and for what you've been saying, because as someone who has been censored on social media quite extensively over the last few years. I'm smiling because it's lovely to have this conversation where someone actually backs you up and says, no, you're not a conspiracy theorist. It is a conspiracy because we've now run out of all of the conspiracies because it's happening in front of our eyes. And I just want to thank you. I'm going to play us out, but thank you for joining us.
It's been a
Joining
pleasure.
me and to joining us and just being and basically allowing me to smile throughout all this, because I love it when someone comes on here and I'm going, I fully agree with you, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that, because I am then not raving mad. It's sadly where we are at. There is a long history, and I just thank you for
I think the fact checkers will then say that we're raving mad, but we know that they're owned as well.
Well, that absolutely.
And you don't have to be paranoid to know that they're owned.
Absolutely. Daniel, I'm going to play us out. Please stay with me. I'll say goodbye to you on the other side.
Sure.
But it's been a real blessing to have this conversation, sir. So thank you very much. And I really look forward to being able to do it again, because I think there's a number of rabbit holes we need to explore. So
sure.
Thank you very much indeed.